Salon. We've been doing this for 4 years now. This fourth year is all about home, and we've had some sessions already in the past where we started out this semester on the top with what is home, where is home, what is a home. We jumped from there. The next one, driven from their home, talking about people then being driven away from their homes. And today's no place like homes. Oh, I'm actually streaming. I'm getting back feed here. That's why I'm going to turn that part of it off. So excuse me for just a second, because I'm actually streaming this. If I can just find it. There we go. I'm going to stop streaming here because I was hearing myself in the background there and trying to figure out what was going on. Okay, let's try this again. And so today we're going to look at non-human homes, biological homes, and try to look at it in a different way. We're wrestling and arguing with these different words, not arguing, but looking at different words and see how we interpret them. Are they really, human constructs? Do they relate just to humans or to other living things as well? So in our first one, we talked about, home is where the what is, and we had a wonderful discussion from students and faculty and others that talked about it's a physical place. No, it's not a physical place. It's where my family is. It's where I come from. It's where my heart is. It's where I grew up. All these different ideas. And today we're going to look at it in a more biological fashion. If later on you want to hear this again or pick up some of the other ones that we have talked about, you can go to this website, usstream.tv, and pick these up. So, and you can they're not edited, but let's give you a good chance to have a look at it again. So today, let me introduce my two colleagues with me. I asked them, I dragged them into doing this with me. This was my idea, not theirs, but I'm glad that they're here with me. Dr. Jenny Skillen in zoology and Shauna Martinez in botany. Other biologists. I'm a retired biologist myself, and we thought it would be, you never really retire. You just finally decompose, I think, eventually. Just move, we go home, wherever that is. So we thought it would be fun today to explore what home is to biological organisms. And so, to be honest, this probably isn't as easy of a salon to discuss as some of the other things, where you might have experiences that you want to add into the discussion. And we implore that you do add in when you can, if you have similar experiences that occurred somewhere or someplace that relate to anything that we're talking about today. So we'll kind of pop back and forth, and professors, if you want to add in at any time, please do. I couldn't help but think that ecology, here we are in Earth Week activities. Every year on April the 22nd, we celebrate Earth Week, or Earth Day around the world, really. John Muir's birthday happens to be April the 21st. And tomorrow we're celebrating Earth Day. Thursday we'll have a full Earth Day set of activities that will be in the quad, in the main part of the campus. But ecology comes from the Greek ekos, pronounced in that way, so it's ecology, from the word the home or a house or whatever. So ecology is really the study of a house. And so we've been looking at variations of home for literally generations as scientists, but not for human homes necessarily, but for homes for other living things, whatever that might be. Additionally, the study of the management of the home we call economics, not economics, but economics, because it comes from this Greek word and so on. Isn't it kind of strange, though, how we've gotten to this point where ecology and economics are at odds with each other, where they really should be working quite closely together. I couldn't help but start with, what if your home is in somebody else's home? I just thought about this, and fortunately for the World Wide Web, I found and grabbed and stole an image. So really, what is a home to a biological organism? Would you guys feel more comfortable just sitting down? And yeah. Just pop in at any time.
I did want to say one thing about, just quickly about the ecology. Ecologists and people who actually study ecology are really nothing more than voyeurs. Just to be clear, it's how we actually we observe organisms in their home, and we learn about their habits. And it's just like being a voyeur. We'd be in a blind and studying them from afar, not being in a part of it. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well,
so a lot of these slides are like that. I
appreciate that. So what good is that? What besides keeping ecologists off the street and employed and so on, really what good is it? What good is understanding how other species operate? Any ideas? Yes.
You can learn how they contribute to a larger system by understanding what they do in their regular habitat. You can understand how they contribute to that. So, like part of my background, I studied gut ecology and microbiomes. So, by understanding what microbes do in their natural habitat, you can understand what they're really contributing to the whole organism.
Precisely. So not only what are they contributing to that organism, but in many cases, what are these species contributing to whole ecosystems or whole communities or the biosphere, for that matter, right? I mean, do we need organisms? Aren't we independent of, aren't we the species that's capable of taking care of itself? We're 100% dependent upon other organisms, right? For our oxygen, for our food, for our resources, for our drugs, and so on. So it's pretty important to study these species and what they do in their different environments. So the difference between the two first words here, niche and habitat. Niche is really your job, what your role. In other words, what you do. Are you a photosynthesizer? Are you a decomposer? Are you a detritivore? Are you a carnivore? Are you, all these different roles that you might play? Do you make your energy from the sun, or do you take it from other places? A habitat, then, is a more physical idea, a place where you conduct your niche. If we go a little bit bigger than that, you might be very intimately related to other species as well in some kind of an ecological community. An ecosystem, then, you might want to add the physical aspects of all these different species in your community operating within the parameters of weather and climate and soils and volcanoes and this and that and the other. So we can keep getting bigger in our studies of the home. Our home, for us, is on one planet. That planet might be divided into a variety of different biomes, which are very, very large ecological components, right? A tropical rainforest versus a deciduous forest versus a desert versus a cold desert versus a hot desert versus a marsh, etc. So our idea of homes can be very, very big all the way down to very, very small. I'm going to hand this over to Jenny if you want to talk about, I just threw a bunch of slides together, and I know that she'll be able to handle any one of these things.
This will be a surprise for all of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to talk a little bit about subspecies of animals and homes related to animals. You've probably thought about animals having a home. Some of them are more obvious, like birds building a nest, that is their home. Some of them are a little less obvious. But we start off here with birds. Birds, do all birds build a home? What do you think?
Of some type.
Of some type. But do they all actually build their nest?
Steal from others.
Some of them steal from others. Great horned owls are notorious for not bothering to build their own nest, but just to steal one that somebody else built, which doesn't always work out so well because they're not real good at maintenance and upkeep. And sometimes halfway through the nesting season, their stolen nest may fall apart. I guess that's karma. They stole the nest. Yeah.
What about like a cuckoo?
Yeah, what about a
Cowbird.
cuckoo or a
Cowbird.
cowbird? Are you guys familiar with those? They take the easy way out. They don't steal the nest. They borrow one for as long as it takes to lay an egg. When the owner of the nest is not looking, the female cuckoo or cowbird will fly in, literally drop off an egg, and fly away again. They're done.
Tag, you're it.
Yeah, very much. Yes. Very much a tag, you're it. So some birds do take the time to build their nest, and some of them take an enormous amount of time to build elaborate, in some cases huge, bald eagle nests can weigh hundreds of pounds because they keep adding layers year after year after year. I think these are weaver birds on the right from Africa. And what's the one on the left? Joe, do you remember?
I do not know that one,
Okay.
sorry.
It's a bird that lives in the grasslands of Argentina.
Oh,
And
good.
they build them from
Okay.
small amounts of straw.
Grasslands
So
of
you see-
Argentina.
You see the opening there, and it actually goes, it's like a U, so there's like an internal part there. It's more protected.
So an entrance and an exit.
No,
No.
it's just the entrance, but then there's like a, like
Okay.
a compartment that's quite closed. And
So-
they try to position themselves, on the pole or, in a grassland there isn't much, there aren't many trees.
Right.
Or maybe a house,
Or a
a
house.
human house.
Okay, I'm glad you're here, Alex.
What's the name of the bird again?
Hornero, Hornero,
Hornero.
which
Hornero.
means oven. Because they
Oven,
kind
yeah.
of look
Okay,
like,
an oven
like
bird.
bread ovens.
Very good. So some of these nests are really, really complex, and they take advantage of many different items in their environment to build these nests out of. I mean, you might have sort of thought that, well, all birds just pick up twigs and they weave a nest out of twigs, but that is not the case at all. There's a lot of variety. Some birds don't build their own nest. Some birds, like these burrowing owls, borrow a burrow that another animal has created, and they will do some maintenance. They will keep the tunnels clear. They will kick out the extra dirt. Burrowing owls do live in the Central Valley. Some of you have seen them, some of you maybe not. When you first see them, it's a little disconcerting to see an owl disappearing into a hole in the ground. It's almost as disconcerting as seeing a Canada goose in a nest in a tree. It just makes you think something's not right. This is not how the world is supposed to work. But the world works in many, many different ways. So burrowing owls do borrow a nest or borrow a home. A lot of organisms share their homes with other organisms. Inside that burrow that the burrowing owl is in, I'm sure there are all sorts of other critters, probably little tiny ones. Some of them are probably parasites, little feather parasites and things living in there. But many animals do share their homes with lots of other organisms. Do we share our homes with other types of organisms?
Hopefully not too many.
Some of the sharing is intentional. We might have a pet. But some of that sharing is sort of accidental. Yeah, I'm sure there's a spider in your house. Maybe a cockroach somewhere. Maybe a scorpion somewhere underneath a pile of stuff in your garage. Maybe some fleas, hopefully not too many. Depends on how many pets you have. But there's a lot of things that can share a home.
Well, this dung beetle here, they collect dung because the dung beetles lay their eggs in the dung, and they take the dung down into the burrows, wait for the youngsters to hatch out, and they nibble away. Chet's party mix.
That's right. Yes. Well, other insects drag other insects into their burrow and lay their eggs in those. And then have a party there. A little cactus wren. living in a cactus. That does not seem like a very friendly house. And yet it's amazing how many animals use a cactus as a home. There's woodpeckers that will drill holes, peck holes, excavate holes into the cactus. There's the cactus wren. What else lives in a cactus?
Next slide.
Next slide. Owls living in a cavity in a cactus. Why would you want to live in a cactus?
Nobody else is gonna bother you.
Yeah, very few organisms are going to bother you. You have a great security system, spines everywhere. Okay, anybody know what these are? Skittles? They are bright and colorful. Nobody recognizes this.
Try the next one.
These are,
Try to get a turn down these. Right.
yeah, I know, it's much more colorful here on the laptop. These are the nests of bowerbirds. Ah. So just mentally magnify the color until it looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. Bowerbirds, the males build these elaborate bowers, little tents, and then they collect stuff, colorful stuff, and they arrange it. In these two photos, you've got bowerbirds that are sorting by color. Everything that's the same color and the same type goes in the same pile. Other species of bowerbirds create geometrical, designs. They make little pathways. And why do the males go to all this effort to make a beautiful home? To attract a female, absolutely, because she's going to walk up, check out the bower, check out his decorating ability, and decide whether or not she's going to stick around. And as far as I know, they don't lay their eggs in the bower.
No, they build
No.
another nest.
Build
This
another
is the
nest.
first-
This is
yeah.
just the first date.
This is the apartment, the pad.
Yeah, they don't stay there. Yeah. Yeah. It's the bachelor pad until he's not a bachelor anymore, and then they move elsewhere. But what an enormous amount of work to build this and take all the time and effort to collect this material. And is it a home? They don't live there. But it's important to their establishment of a nest where they will produce offspring. So in that sense, it's important to the construction of their home. Some more pictures of bowerbirds. They're beautiful birds.
Different species prefer different colors, and if there's a campground around where there's plastic or junk, human-made junk, they'll collect all that stuff too.
Mhm.
I'll jump in here because this, a colleague, no, you can say it. A colleague called me and said, you got to get on the webcam for Glacier National Park and look up bear on a tree. So way off in the distance, the bear cam is sitting at the very top of this cottonwood tree, and with a zoom in close, you can see who's inhabiting that. So some of the more modern day voyeuristic techniques are webcams, as you well know. So, but that's it. So if you go to wildlife webcams and go birds of prey, eagles, this and that and the other, you don't even have to go out in the field. You don't even have to take your pajamas off. Just stay there and watch wildlife all day long. So,
It's a great way to avoid grading papers.
there you go.
Not that I would ever do that.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a bear in a tree. What's it doing there? Hanging out. Not exactly taking a selfie since it's not operating the camera. Is that its home? Yeah. How long do they stay in their den?
Once a month. And they return.
And part of it depends on where they are and how long winter lasts and how cold it is and how much shelter they need. And in some parts of the country where it's warm, the bears aren't going to hibernate. They're going to be active year-round. But in Glacier, it gets pretty cold. I don't know how deep the snow gets in that area, but
Not too deep, but it's cold
it's
for
cold.
a long time.
Yeah, not a lot of food. So bears typically don't build their home. They find a protected place, and often it's under a pile of logs, maybe it's a cave, You know, it's not always that stereotypical bear den that they put in the movies. It's not always a big, dark, scary cave. And animals need shelter. A home for an animal is often just a temporary shelter, maybe to get them through the day if they're a nocturnal species, or through the night if they're active during the day. Maybe they'll spend a few days if there's a storm, but it's often temporary. Maybe it's just a shelter they use tonight and they're going to move on and they're not going to come back. But it's still a necessary place of refuge, so it is still a home. But that idea of home being a permanent or a semi-permanent place, as it often is for a human, it's not always the same for an animal.
In the case of the lower right, that's the northern or Pacific fisher. The Pacific fisher's populations have declined enormously because as we log, or as forest fires occur and we log after them and so on, we're not leaving enough trees with homes, with excavations for them, because that's their hangout.
Wildlife trees. The big old dying trees with holes in them. Wildlife trees. If they're not causing a problem, not threatening to fall on your house, it's great to leave them because animals like this will use them. And here is an animal that's famous for building a home. We often think about beavers building a dam. They don't actually live in the dam. They build the dam to block the water, creating a pond, and then they will build a lodge. So that's what we see in the photo here on the left, the beaver lodge. Sometimes they don't even build a lodge, though. They live in a burrow in the bank, and then there's a dam nearby. Their home, their lodge, or their den usually has an entrance that's underwater, so it's completely hidden, and they can hold their breath, they dive down, they enter, and then they go up, and the living room and bedroom, all in one, is above the water line. So they're perfectly safe from almost all predators. Is there anything you want to add about beavers? See what we have next here. All right, you know what it is, anybody? It's a ferret. Black-footed ferrets. And what do ferrets like to eat?
Anything that moves?
Yes, very much. If it's small enough, you know. They'll dream about the bigger things.
There we go.
They do like prairie dogs. This is an animal that borrows a home. They love to live in prairie dog colonies. Prairie dogs are tasty if you're a black-footed ferret, and prairie dogs are very good at digging. So there's a whole apartment complex you can move into if you are a black-footed ferret, along with gopher snakes and rattlesnakes and all sorts of crickets and things will also move into the prairie dog colony. I don't know how the prairie dogs feel about that. Probably not so happy. Some animals take a very different approach. They just carry their house with them wherever they go. There's some advantages to that because wherever you go, you have a house. There's some disadvantages. Do you want to carry your house on your back everywhere you go? No, probably not. It's heavy. Snails don't move very fast. But wherever they go, if they get tired or the weather gets too hot and too dry, they can just pull themselves into their shell, into their house, and they're pretty safe. They're not 100% safe. There are other animals that have evolved characteristics to get the snail out of its house. We have those characteristics. If you order escargot in a restaurant, you'll get special little utensils to get the snail out of its house. Yeah. I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of escargot. I tried them once. I don't know.
With enough garlic and butter.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah. It could have been just the way they were prepared, but
Chocolate.
Yeah, it was weird.
That would be weird.
Yeah,
I like Yeah.
garlic and butter.
You haven't had escargot until you've had them in the south of France.
Yeah.
well, that's probably true. If I ever find myself in the south of France. Okay. Next field trip.
Yes.
To carry your house with you, advantages but disadvantages. Your house can only be so sturdy. It gets heavy. Snails in particular have had to modify their body structure. I don't know if you've ever tried to crawl around on the floor with a giant curving thing on your back, but it's hard to keep your balance. You would tip over very easily. Carrying your grandson. Put all the grandkids on your back and try to crawl around without losing anybody. So their whole body plan has been altered. They're lopsided in order to keep their house slightly lopsided on the body, which provides some stability, and they can manage it better. But they've reduced some of their internal organs in order to accommodate that lopsided structure that is a necessity for them. Some more animals that carry their house with them. Right, the hermit crab, which doesn't even build its own house. It just finds an empty one and is constantly trading up. And always flipping houses. It moves in, it lives there for a while, and is always on the search for a bigger, better house. And the turtle, contrary to cartoons, you cannot take the shell off of a turtle and let the turtle run around and put it back in the shell. It looks really cute in cartoons, but it's not how they work. All right, this shell is an integral part of the turtle. Many, but not all, turtles can pull their head and tail and legs into the shell. Some of them can't. Those can usually bite very hard. The ones that can't pull their head in, they have some defense. Exactly, just with their head in. Not a lot of things can eat a turtle when it's inside its shell, so that's the advantage. But they're not terribly graceful and they're not terribly quick. That's the disadvantage. But they're generally fairly safe.
Oh, I love that one.
Okay, anybody know what it is? That's an armadillo. Do we have armadillos in North America?
We do.
Yes, we do. We do.
Dead on the
indeed.
road everywhere in the south.
Yes, if you head to the south, Texas, and places in that region, you will find the 9-banded armadillo. If you head further south to Central and South America, you're going to find more species of armadillos, including one of my favorites, I think just because I like the name, and they're kind of cute. It's the pink fairy armadillo. Tiny little things. I mean, how can you not like the sound of that?
It's mutually exclusive.
It does seem mutually exclusive, but armadillos. Do they carry their house with them? What do you think?
It's really their armor, isn't it?
Yeah. They can curl up. They have this protective armor, but they have burrows. They'll go underground in a burrow. That's really their house. They have a den. But they do carry protection with them. Okay, here's a really awesome creature. Any guesses?
So what happens if you start growing in here and moving in the show?
Yeah. So this is a chambered nautilus. It's a relative of an octopus. I always tell my students that just kind of imagine taking an octopus and shoving it into a snail shell, and that's kind of what a chambered nautilus looks like. You can see the shell in the lower right corner. That one's been sliced in half, so you can see the chambers in the middle. So and there's chambers, there's compartments. So the whole animal has to fit in the outermost chamber, that large chamber. And as the animal grows, it makes the shell bigger. So it's always making a newer, larger compartment to live in. So great protective structure. They are permanently attached to that shell. They cannot leave the shell, but it provides protection, not just from predators, but from pressure, because they are deep ocean creatures, and they travel thousands of feet down in the water, and the water pressure would just smash them if they didn't have that shell to protect them. Okay, here's a weird one if you haven't taken zoology. Any guesses as to what this thing is?
Paintbrushes?
Paintbrushes? Yeah. Yeah. No, but
The seed bed?
you're very close. Yeah, it is an animal. That's the first thing that surprises some people.
It's not a kind of herb, right?
This is actually a worm.
Worm.
A worm. It's the fanciest looking relative of an earthworm you've probably ever seen, but it is a relative of an earthworm. If we could pull the worm out of the little tube that it builds, you'd see it's got little segments, kind of like an earthworm, but it's got a pretty fancy headdress. It's got all these little tentacles that stick out to grab food. There's a whole bunch of things like this, and they sort of collectively get called tube worms because they live in a tube, and that's their home. Some of them can come out of the tube and go back in. Some of them could physically, but don't. It's like, this is my house and I am not leaving no matter what. And some of them physically cannot leave the tube. They're physically attached to it. So there's a whole diversity of worms. In zoology, that's one of the first things I tell people. We're going to spend a lot of time on worms because there's so many worms. They don't believe me until we get to like the 4th chapter of worms. Look, more worms. These are tube worms, but these live at the bottom of the ocean in what theoretically should be one of the most inhospitable places. It's dark, you're at the bottom of the ocean, water pressure is significant, and they live next to hydrothermal vents. And what's coming out of those vents is superheated water and toxic gases in dense concentrations, sulfuric gas and carbon dioxide, and this is not where you expect to find life. And there they are, thriving at the bottom of the ocean.
They're miles down.
They are.
Whole ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, a whole ecosystem down
A
there.
whole home down there.
Yes.
I just thought a few things. Temporary home being carried by mom or
Yes,
dad.
yes, right. Scorpions, very good moms. They carry their babies on their back. Now, you probably don't think about scorpions as having maternal instincts, but they carry their babies. So for a while, for the young scorpions, that is home. And more cute furry mammals carrying their babies. Right, but yeah, temporary home. It's wherever mom goes is your home. Okay, one of the more bizarre looking amphibians. This is, I think, a Suriname toad. Is that-
Suriname, yeah.
yeah. And all the little lumps are the eggs that are developing into tadpoles. So they mate, they lay the eggs, and the male takes the eggs and we'll assume politely smushes them into the back of the female, and they stick and her skin kind of grows over them. So they're protected. Wherever mom goes, the eggs go. She keeps them safe from predators, they don't dry out. Of course, eventually they hatch, and then it's kind of like a horror movie. They have to emerge from her back. Yeah.
Next slide.
Yeah.
And next slide.
It's a different species, but
Yeah.
Right? Aren't you glad people are the way people are?
I think it's almost time to go.
Yeah. More temporary homes. That seems nice and safe, doesn't it? Right? Home is supposed to be a place of safety and refuge, and one critter's refuge is not the same as another critter's refuge. This looks much safer. I just feel better about fluffy feathers instead of big carnivorous teeth protecting me. A lot of animals carry their young for a while until their young are big enough to fend for themselves. Well, it gets cuter.
Aww.
Right. With
I'll take
very
it.
fishy breath. Okay. Migrations?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was thinking also about what if your home is a lot bigger? What if it's not just in one physical place? So a lot of species migrate. Why? Why do you think they migrate?
Weather.
The weather changes, they don't like it where it is right now. Yeah, food resources change, so it could be bad weather, move someplace else and so on. We're kind of in a nice place being in the middle of the latitude, continents of the continents and so on, so we get to see species that migrate down from the north, avoiding winter and coming here. We get other species coming from the south as well. So we have short distance migrators, long distance migrators. Some suggestions for short distance are like quail and deer. Deer just migrate up and down the Sierra Nevada here. As the winter settles in, they move down, same as the sheep. Sorry?
From my yard to her yard.
Yeah, exactly. Or same as mountain sheep and so on. Quail, interesting, I'll show you a picture in a minute. Some longer distance thing would be like wildebeest and caribou that migrate literally for hundreds to thousands of miles. And long distance stuff like Arctic terns that go all the way from the South Pole to Alaska, thousands and thousands of miles that they migrate. If you think about the migrations that salmon do, years later, after they've lived in the sea, they go back to their spawning grounds, and they could have done thousands of miles in their life, but they know exactly where they were born somehow by the chemical smells and whatever. They make it back to their birthing grounds and deposit their eggs in the very same place. On the right is a mountain quail. We have valley quail a little bit lower, and the mountain quail lives up in the mountains, but they migrate down the hill as the winter sets in up in the high Sierra. But they literally just walk. They can fly perfectly well, but they walk all the way down here, and then they walk all the way back up again later on. The wildebeest and zebra, these fantastic shows that you've been watching since you were a kid, of the migrations in the Masai Mara, following essentially a pathway of resources where the rains are landing to grow the grasses that they need, and the fires follow them and so on. They do these huge cycles of movement. And everybody knows that the monarchs, these magnificent animals on the right, you'll see that most of the monarchs that make it to Mexico are coming from east of the Rocky Mountains. But we have our own California collections as well that migrate southward, but they're all going to basically the same mountain area in Mexico as well, which is being overforested. There's a lot of attempt to try to do some protection in there as well. But all along the way, there are pesticides and deforestation and so on. They've got to land someplace and nectar feed, and then later on lay their eggs on milkweeds and milkweed family and so on. So there's a lot of trouble with a long migration like the monarchs. I think the most incredible thing about the monarchs migration is that it is not just one generation. There's not a butterfly that goes all the way to Mexico, overwinters, and comes all the way back to Kansas again. There are multiple generations. And so this is a species who knows its home collectively. Well, I'm not going to see my home again, but my great-great-grandchildren will. And they know this genetically, which is absolutely marvelous, of course. We have the fortune to have one of the longest larger migration routes of the California gray whale, which summers all the way up in Alaska and winters all the way down in Baja California. Here's a gray whale spy hopping here probably in the Sea of Cortez or down in San Ignacio Lagoon or something of this nature. And I love this bird. If you don't know this bird, you need to hear it and learn about it. The sandhill cranes that come all the way down here. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, come on, you can do better than that. It's not a goose. It's not the cackling geese that you hear, but if it's more like.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's very good. That's
See, if you hear that, look straight up in the sky. Cup your ears like this so that you can hear them a little bit better. They're going to be a mile or two above you, circling, so that they can gain altitude and head back to Alaska or Canada. But they'll be down here all winter long. You'll start seeing them in late October or November, and then you start to lose them in the spring. By now, they're all gone, so you've kind of missed them. And we wait until next year, literally thousands of miles. Back to Argentina. Thank you for providing us, Dr. Amigo, with the hornero, the little nest. This is a bird that migrates all the way from Argentina, all the way up into Canada, and even a population coming into the Great Valley every year, the Swainson's hawk. So their home is in Argentina. No, it's actually in Uruguay. No, it's actually in Colombia. Oh, it's actually in Mexico. Oh, it's actually, so their home is different places at, of course, different times. And think about all of the challenges that you have to survive in each of these different locations as well. So many of the warblers that you hear in the spring have come up from Mexico, from South America, and so on. There are hummingbirds that fly from South America across the Gulf of the Gulf of Mexico to the States nonstop. I mean, what else? There's no place to stop, So they literally fly nonstop all the way down. I'm going to ask Shauna to jump in here and talk about some of the ways that we look at life in homes together.
So I was actually thinking about, I'm a botanist, and from a plant's perspective, what does it mean to be home? And I was thinking about some of these other things that it's pretty clear definition of home, and maybe, especially long distance, maybe not so clear. But I was thinking actually of your microbiome example. When is it that a species is home when they're living either on another species or in another species? So some of these symbioses, which means living together, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a positive relationship. Mutualism is one of those positive relationships, but symbiosis is the word that we use for organisms that live with each other. And so we have mutualism, that's the positive one, of course. Parasitism, which actually is one preying upon another or actually parasitizing another. And commensalism, that's when one is actually getting a home, but not at the expense of another species. It could be just simply living there, not annoying the other one whatsoever. And then neutralism is nobody cares about where they're living. Is it this big thing?
The right side.
Right side. So the first one, it actually comes from an animal, and you guys probably have more information on this, but this is, clownfish and anemone, and the clownfish seeks out its home probably for protection. Does, the anemone gets anything out of this relationship?
The anemone gets anything.
Yeah, I think this is more of a commensal
Although we
relationship.
could make it more complicated, because some anemones have symbiotic algae.
Correct.
in their
That's
tissues.
actually in the next slide.
You might have lots of things in one photo.
So this is actually a little algae that can live, a little dinoflagellate that can live inside these anemones, the tentacles of these things. They're called zooxanthellae. And a lot of them photosynthesize at certain, when the sun is up, and they actually give sugars to the animal that they're living inside. And I've often wondered, how come it's really cool that algae can actually live inside of other animals. And I've been thinking, why not us? Wouldn't that be an interesting thing if we could tattoo our skin with some, little cyanobacteria or little algae or something and go out in the sun and get sugar? I don't know.
I've thought of this a lot, and I've discovered the reason why that won't happen.
Why?
Because if you're too green, no one will mate with you. And if you can't mate, it has no evolutionary significance whatsoever.
I was just thinking little green tattoos, go out in the sun,
Well,
eat a little lunch.
this is why the Hulk has no children.
But anyway, these animals actually do that. They actually take within their cells entire organisms. And a lot of times these are obligate relationships, meaning they can't live without each other. Sometimes they're facultative relationships, meaning that, they do better with the other one, but not necessarily always. Lichens are one of those that are obligate. They have obligate relationships, and I've been learning a lot more. They know a lot more about lichen morphology than they ever did. Lichens, I'm going to go back forward and show some lichens. You have some of these pictures. This one, lichen. I want to show the Joyce. This is a good one.
Okay. Oh, all right.
This one, because I want to come back. This is moss versus lichen, because a lot of people mistake lichens for mosses and vice versa. Oi, moss, this is my stone. No, it's not. 10 years later, get off. Who's going to make me? 50 years later, that's it. I'm coming over. Come on then. 100 years later, you'll be sorry when I get there. You'll be the one who's sorry. So, what's a moss and what's a lichen? Well, a moss is a plant and a lichen is something else. A lichen is actually a relationship between a fungus and either an algae or a cyanobacteria, a blue-green algae, if you will. And it's like a sandwich. So the fungus makes up the bread, and the algae or cyanobacteria makes up the peanut butter in the middle. And I always remember the lichen story because Alice algae and Freddie fungus took a lichen to each other, and theirs was a marriage on the rocks, or out on a limb, like that one. Now, okay, so I've learned about lichens since I was itty bitty, and I've always wondered, is it really a mutualistic relationship that these guys have? So the algae, it finds its home within the cells of the fungus, or within the matrix, I should say, of the fungus. Is she, Alice, referring to algae, really willing? Is she a willing partner? I've kind of wondered. And recently they've discovered that there's different types of fungi that are actually involved in the relationship as well. There's one that comes in and parasitizes the whole lot inside the lichen. There's also algae that are replaced by cyanobacteria. And they call these individual guys species. So what lichens are really, I think, up to us to determine what kind of relationship they have, whether or not it's a parasitic relationship, whether it's a commensal relationship, or whether it's a true mutualistic relationship. So these are. Go back.
What's the lichen on the left, Shona?
This is actually our state lichen. Ramalina. Ramalina.
Lace lichen.
Lace lichen. It's really, really pretty. It's from not so much around here, but it's more often found on the coast. It's very
Now,
pretty.
you know something that most students don't know.
Yeah. I could say more about lichens, but I'm not. You can see I get really enthused. I love animals; they're so cute, and plants and fungi really get the short shrift of everything.
Where do they get their color again?
Their color comes from a lot of the algae that are in there, and also some of the pigments that they actually produce, like anthocyanins. Aren't these pretty? These are crustose lichens on a rock. There's the joke. There's some relationships that honestly I could probably talk for the next hour on, and this is one of my favorites. This has to do again with some of the fungi. See you later. Everybody walks out when I talking fungi. This is actually the home of this fungi is in the roots of any kind of plant. Any kind of plant. Some of these relationships are we're only finding out some of the significances of these relationships. Where's the pointer thing?
Right in the middle.
Right in the middle. So this is actually a little seedling. These are the roots of that seedling. All of this is the fungus. So the fungus can actually increase the absorptive capacity of that particular tree more than 10 times. It'll pick up water and minerals. And what do you think that the fungus is actually getting from the tree in return? Because this is a mutualistic relationship. What's it getting from the tree in return? Go ahead.
Some nutrients or sugars.
Sugars. Yeah, most sugars. And so when that happens, this is a really interesting part. the sugars go down the tree into the mycorrhizae, but the mycorrhizae doesn't just stop at that tree. It actually connects to other trees. And that sugar can actually travel through the mycorrhizae and into another tree that it could be weak. So it can use the energy. And not only that, but it will actually connect this tree to this tree, 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 until you have essentially the entire underground network as a single home, if you will. That's kind of an amazing thing. They share resources. Plants and fungi in forested ecosystems actually share resources. So this whole idea, you can actually see this is a pepper grown with mycorrhizae and without. Yeah, sorry.
Are the how do I put it? Does a certain plant require a certain type of this? For example, I'll say Japanese black pines. They will grow you get seeds from Japan, grow in your yard, and a certain type of this grows on the roots. But it's not probably not the same one that was in Japan.
Right. I think we're learning about the specificity of the mycorrhizae because we can grow plants without mycorrhizae here. Do they grow as well as they did in their home from where they came from? Do they? Maybe, maybe not. And because it depends on this mycorrhizal network that they can hook into. I'm kind of worried about the trees that we have in our yard that are separated from the community of trees. How well are they performing without the rest of their buddies nearby? That's kind of an interesting aspect as well. But this is actually showing a pepper grown without mycorrhizae on the left and with mycorrhizae on the right. Yeah.
Does the mycorrhizae care which trees, or can they be
Okay,
selfish with?
What they're actually finding out is that some are specific and will only attach to this species and not share resources with this other species. But some of the trees actually will grow their roots together and take care of other species. And some, they're finding out that trees, even with the mycorrhizae and without, take care of their own kin. They shuttle more nutrients to their kin than to, say, other species. And some species aren't even connected on the network. Well, way mind-blowing, complicated kind of things. Native or not, this is kind of an important. Where was this slide taken?
Jepson.
Jepson Prairie. This is a recent picture of Jepson Prairie, and these clumps are actually native grasses. And I was thinking of this whole mycorrhizae thing, and I just finished reading a paper about how our native plants that 200 years ago were all hooked up in this mycorrhizae network and hooked up to each other by roots. And any place where that soil has been disturbed, we've had a huge loss of the native species. This Jepson Prairie, if you look in the picture, we have native grasses, those are the clumps. Everything else is an import from Europe. Sorry, I'm not looking over here.
No, I'm
Okay.
following all.
And the imported species evidently aren't connected to the mycorrhizae network. And they can actually thrive in disturbed areas where our native plants, where it's been disturbed, cannot. And I've always learned that they are outcompeted by the non-native species. Where did the non-native species come from? How did they get here? Yeah, accidental or purposeful. They came in fur, in animal feces, feed, seeds, etc. So native, how many of us are actually, I always think about us, how many of us are actually native to our particular region? Well, plants are kind of the same way. They came with us from other parts of the world. And so the native aspects are kind of interesting. This is actually another picture of non-native species that can take over entire areas. The one on the left, anybody know that one? Star thistle. Star thistle, I don't think is hooked up to the mycorrhizal network. I don't. I think it just can go in any place that's been disturbed, any place whatsoever. And the one on the right?
That's kudzu.
That's kudzu. Kudzu is essentially covering all other vegetation. That's all 100% kudzu. When it takes over, it makes that place its home. And there's no competition for that home whatsoever. All right, here's another one. Speaking of parasites, this is actually Dodder, the Dodder, the Cuscuta, and it is actually a parasite. This is a native plant that actually parasitizes another plant. So that's a plant that's living on another plant, but it's a parasitic relationship. It looks like orange spaghetti. It's a flowering plant, by the way. It actually produces flowers and fruits.
So what does it do? Is it just like punch into the other
It
plant?
punches right into the, essentially the pipes, the vascular tissue that carries the sugar. And some of them are really bad parasites.
But it's a flowering plant. It has little
Yep.
bitty flowers that produce seeds that hit the ground and starts wandering around looking for another plant.
Do you want to talk about Rafflesia?
Rafflesia on the left is the largest single flower of the world, but it's always parasitizing a vine nearby. And so here in the jungles of Sumatra is Rafflesia arnoldi. You can see the size of this one single flower. And just for the heck of it, down in the lower right is Palastoles thurberi, which is in the same family but lives on desert plants in California. So the largest flower and one of the tiniest that you can see here living in the desert. Both of these are total parasites. Their home is associated with some other plant that they parasitize. They take all of their sugars from it, all of their food. They make their flowers, set their seeds. The seeds start growing. They have just enough energy to go find something to parasitize, and then they start growing like parasites again.
So I was also thinking about the home in terms of plants and all the animals. The community is a home for a lot of organisms. You can't take it, what did John Muir say?
When you pluck on anything in the universe, you find it connected
To everything else. This is essentially the idea of the community as being a home, and this shows the emergence, the large canopy trees with the main canopy, under canopy, shrub layer, ground level, and this does not show the mycorrhizal network. Under the ground, there's millipedes and centipedes and all kinds of things in this home. You can't remove a tree and still call it a forest necessarily, because you've removed homes from lots and lots and lots of different organisms. There's vines, lianas, etc. And so I was thinking about the species that live on other species and then on those species as well. On a tree in the tropical rainforest, you can have over 300 different species living on one tree. You can have plants living actually on other plants. Those are called epiphytes. Things like bromeliads and ferns and other kinds of things. And then there's what? No.
Then you can have the bromeliad frog.
Correct, the
living
frogs.
in the bromeliad.
And the mosquito larvae may be living in, where the frog, it just goes on and on and on. These are organisms living on other organisms. We found entire ecosystems in the tops of the canopy of the redwood forests. Species we didn't know existed up there. Everywhere we look, we find these just incredible assemblages of species making their home on on specifically plants. Did you want to go for the food
Sure,
web?
I can. Yeah, this is just to point out that really is anything living by itself. And, so many things are like the Muir talk and so on, or the things that he said. we find things connected to everything else. So really, not only like in the case of that tropical forest where so many species are living on and upon and within other species, they're also connected in terms of what they eat. Food webs are really, how hierarchies are formed, whether it's on a grassland or in the prairies like this, and the black-footed ferrets that Ginny was talking about live in these prairie dog holes, and it turns out that the black-footed ferrets aren't doing as well because the prairie dogs aren't doing as well. And why aren't the prairie dogs doing as well? It's because we've wiped out the bison that used to be out there. The bison used to eat and pound down the grasses low enough so that the prairie dogs would feel secure in breeding, and so now that the grasses are getting too tall, the prairie dogs don't feel secure and their populations die out. Consequently, the black-footed ferret populations die out, so the home is really the community.
I think one of the good examples is the wolf population in Yellowstone. That's
wolf and the elk, and so taking the wolf out of the equation, the elk population grows like crazy. The elk population just literally decimates the vegetation and destroys the local flora as well. So we really have to think of things in much larger ecosystems and a much larger, even in the soils. And as Shauna was pointing out, the mycorrhizae and so on. But in the soil, a handful of soil, there could be a million different things in there, especially the microbes as well. But there's microbes, and then there's invertebrates, and then there's vertebrates, and these things all live in the soil. And yet, what are we doing? But we're pouring concrete and asphalt on top of every piece of soil that we find out there. And if it's growing weeds, then we're scared to death that we're going to have weed problems and so on. Yet these are really the only productive ecosystems that we find left, especially in some cities. I'll blow right through this. What if your home isn't just in one? If you're a parasitic plant, what if it's not just in one plant, but in numerous plants? Here's a species of fungus-like creature that lives in different species throughout the year. At one time of the year, it's living in gooseberries. And another time of the year, it's living in wheat. In different stages, these spores will go out, get into another type of wheat, and be a different type of spore. And so this thing has 3 different bodies that, at any one time, they thought it was 3 different species at one time. Now I find out it's the very same species that just keeps moving from host to host. And I'm going to let Jenny finish up with some parasites here. So let's get down and dirty with
See, everybody can handle the plant parasites. That's like not vomit material.
Oh, it's so much fun to talk about the animal parasites. It's more fun with a classroom of students when you watch them start to get a little twitchy. Okay, schistosomiasis. There are so many parasites that affect humans, not to mention parasites that affect every other vertebrate on the planet. I mean, you find an animal of some sort and there's a parasite that infects it. Schistosomiasis is a parasitic disease. Little teeny tiny organisms that live inside other organisms, and they're transmitted through other animals. In the case of the schistosomes, usually it's a snail. So these little creatures are in an aquatic habitat, they're swimming, they find a snail, they move into the snail, they reproduce inside the snail, they multiply. They leave the snail, which doesn't usually go well for the snail, and then they go in search of their next host, which is often a human or some other vertebrate. And then they multiply in that vertebrate, and then they continue to, that life cycle just continues. Luckily for us in North America, we don't really have to worry about schistosomiasis. It is pretty much confined to the tropics, but it is a huge problem in the tropics because, excuse me, if you're in contaminated water, you can be infected with them. A lot of parasites, you have to eat them or drink the water that they're in. It's not the case with the schistosomes. They have the ability to penetrate through your skin. So if you are just wading in the water.
Planting rice.
planting rice, crossing the river because there's no bridge, pulling in your fishing nets. I mean, it's a very easy thing to prevent transmission, stay out of the water. But that's often impossible for people to stay out of the water. So understanding the life cycle and controlling the snail population is often our best strategy for controlling this parasite. Malaria, another parasite transmitted by mosquitoes. Not every species of mosquito has the ability to transmit malaria, but some do. And the parasite reproduces inside the mosquito. When the mosquito bites you, you can be infected with one of the life stages of the parasite. It can then multiply inside the human. If the mosquito bites you, some of those parasites will be removed from you and then transmitted to another human. We have malaria in California.
Oh,
It's not really an issue today, but it has been an issue. Gary, do you know what the impact was in the gold rush?
Well, because of the flooding in the valley, because there's no levees in that time.
We had more mosquitoes?
It's talked about.
Yeah,
But I don't know if they called it malaria, they probably had another name for it.
Probably.
But they always had something.
something. I mean, today, it's not so much an issue. We don't have as much habitat to support the mosquitoes that can transmit malaria. And the human who gets sick with malaria usually ends up confined in the hospital in a location where mosquitoes can't bite you and transmit the disease to others. So we've broken that cycle very quickly. More parasites, larger external parasites. Right here, we've got a close-up of a bird's eye, and all around the eye are external, ectoparasites. I don't know what species this is.
Bird lice.
This is bird lice in general, yeah. Many different species. They feed on the bird. If there's a lot of them, it is going to be detrimental to the bird. But generally, it's not so detrimental that it leads to the death of the bird.
Because it's closely related to head lice.
Yes, there are many different species of lice, none of which you want, but they're out there.
I had one of those
Just the other day.
just the other day.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Where did you have it?
Right here, when I was good.
Yeah, ticks. Common parasites.
They don't flinch.
No, you don't leave them long enough for them to. Yeah. As an animal goes, they're kind of impressive with their ability to find a host, their ability to ingest large amounts of food when they have access to it. I mean, you can see the difference in size here. Then they can go for quite a while without eating. I don't want my own tick, but I can be impressed by their abilities. Pretty much any vertebrate has a tick, at least one species of tick that can parasitize it, often more.
Many ticks have bacteria that live only in them.
In them.
And they're the source of Lyme disease and spotted fever. and-
Yeah, all sorts of tick-borne diseases.
Fortunately, there are oxpeckers.
Oxpeckers, not around here, but in other places. Yeah, these fantastic birds that operate a cleaning service. They land on the large mammals
All they eat.
and remove the parasites.
It's in East Africa.
Yes. That, I feel like it would take some getting used to have one of these oxpeckers cleaning you up. I'm not sure I'd ever get used to this.
They actually fly into the mouth too.
Yeah.
I've seen them just in
Yeah.
giraffes like, come on, open up, get in there. And,
Yeah. I don't know. Not going to the dentist with that.
Because your dentist.
Exactly.
That one in the nose though, that one's a killer.
All right. I'm going to wrap this up with.
We're going to wrap this up with yeah, by the way, that's not my photograph, but I saw this in East Africa. I swear my daughters and I were watching this Cape buffalo with 2 in the ears and 2 in the nose, and I swear we saw this Cape buffalo cross his eyes while he's trying to let those things. Then he finally just went and just blew them all out. But so we're just going to end up with something that's not quite so happy, but we'll be done here in just a little bit. Homes are changing. Climate is changing, and we can argue if we want about who's responsible or whatever, but the end result is that we're changing. Species are being said to have to move 1/4 of a mile a year, or 3 almost 4 feet a day to the north, or latitudinally, as climate changes. Similarly, as climate changes and things are warming, species that require cooler temperatures have to move farther and farther up the hills and so on. So climate change is causing species homes to change. Large-scale homes, small-scale homes, or whatever. We're seeing migrations occur at different times of the year now, up and down the hill at different times as well. The pika, our tiny little Sierran mini rabbit, is literally being found now at higher and higher elevations. The one on the lower right is the least chipmunk, which is literally, both of these are endangered of going extinct as they move higher and higher up the hill to try to find the cold enough habitat for them to survive in. And probably the poster child for this whole thing is the polar bear, whose life depends upon enough pack ice so that they can hunt. They only hunt from pack ice, looking for breathing holes where seals come up. And if there's not enough pack ice, they're literally being found swimming out in the ocean, drowned now, literally looking for some pack ice upon which they can sit and hope to be able to hunt from there. And so that's kind of a lousy way to end this thing, but it makes us think that, it's not just our homes that are threatened, but the homes of all of these species upon which we completely depend. And so it is important to stand your grounds when you're having arguments about the environment, about climate change, about species, about biological diversity, because this is our home collectively. It's not just the home of Homo sapiens, it's the home of so many different species upon which we depend for 100%, for everything that we breathe, for everything that we eat, and we've constantly got to keep the fight up. So vote Earth. This Thursday we will be celebrating Earth Day here on campus. We hope you can join us, and put in your calendar for next time. Our final Salon of the year will be on May the 9th, where Michelle Johnson will be bringing her classes of English composition students have been writing about home, all their different perspectives about the good and the bad and the ugly of home. What is it and what does it mean to them? So we hope that you join us. Rejoice, go out there and demand equality of all species, not just us. And we really appreciate your coming today. So happy Earth Week. It should be every day, every week, right? But thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Shauna and Jenny.